Okay, so we're live, and today I just want to take a look at Surah 67, which is entitled The Kingdom, and other versions, it's called simply Kingdom or Sovereignty, and the Arabic is Al-Mulk. So this surah is interesting for a couple of reasons. One of them being that according to Muhammad's followers and his companions, these surahs, these 30 surahs, which constitute 30 ayat, rather, which constitute this surah, will intercede on behalf of believing Muslims. So, despite the fact that Islam emphasizes Tawheed and oneness. Oh, hey, Nate. Good to see you. Despite the fact that Islam emphasizes oneness more, which is really unification or becoming one, and the fact that you can't commit shirk, which is establishing other things alongside Allah, Islam does this repeatedly. I've already gone over in previous videos how it does so with regard to the Quran itself, the eternality of the Quran. This is something that was mercilessly prosecuted under particular Abbasid caliphs. They would imprison and sometimes even kill those who claimed that the Quran was eternal. And this was something that's very well documented. Nabil Qureshi explores this subject in his apologetics text, No God But One, and raises this issue as well, the fact that you had something that's considered universally accepted. Hi, Matthew. Something that's considered universally accepted now among Muslims, the fact that the Quran is uncreated, that it was pre-existent, it's eternal. This was a belief that was relentlessly prosecuted in the Abbasid Caliphate, and it didn't change until many years later, where where a separate view, the idea that the Quran is eternal, was established, and people who denied it, who said that the Quran was created, they were persecuted. As an aside, this is one of the funny things when Muslims claim, when they try to commit takfir, and someone was doing this the other day because I I brought up the head of the Nizari Ismaili sect or clan, the Aga Khan, who's extremely wealthy and who's one of the richest religious figures on the planet. And he said, well, these aren't real Muslims. And my rejoinder was, then what do you call people who believed uh, uh, in the uncreatedness of the Quran? Because they were not considered Muslims at one point. They were prosecuted because they were committing shirk. They were establishing the Quran alongside Allah, and Allah has no partners. This is one of the reasons Muslims go nuts whenever you try to explain to them the deity of Jesus Christ or the Trinity, and they simply can't comprehend it. But they don't really understand that within Islam itself, you have problems with shirk, the Quran, but also, as this points out, it's not just the Quran in toto. This surah 67, the kingdom, if you go to the hadith, the tradition, the tafsirs, they these are authentic according to Muslims, at least using their logic. These are authentic traditions, and it says, these ayat will intercede. So it's not just the book itself uh, that's established alongside Allah. It's the ayah that you read in the book, in individual surahs. So that's very problematic for Muslims because they don't really have a good explanation for why they're committing shirk. But this surah is just an airtight argument against the idea that Muslims are monotheistic, that they do not that they abhor shirk, because each one of these ayah is supposedly going to intercede for Muslims during Judgment Day, on the Day of Judgment. At least that's Islamic tradition. So it begins with Bismillah, the Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and it continues with the first verse. Blessed is he in whose hand is the kingdom, and he has power over all things. Now, they're not referring to the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. In verse 2, it says, who created death and life that he may try you? Which of you is best in deeds? Again, emphasizing the works-based soteriology of Islam, the rendering of deeds, and that's how you're going to be judged. And he is the mighty, the forgiving, who created the seven heavens, one above another. You see no incongruity in the creation of the beneficent God. Then look again. Can you see any disorder? And the seven heavens is interesting. I'm not going to go too much into it here, but there's a good page. I'm sure Sam Shamoon has mentioned this tons of times, but in Answering Islam, there's a good page that addresses this subject, what Muhammad meant by the seven heavens. Then turn back the eye. So I would just recommend going there. In verse 4, it says, then turn back the eye again and again. Your look shall come back to you confused while it is fatigued. And certainly we have adorned this lower heaven with lamps, and we have made these missiles for the shaitans, and we have prepared for them the chastisement of burning. Now, most of you probably know when he's referring to missiles, he's talking about shooting stars or comets. This is what Muhammad believed, that these were missiles aimed by Allah, precision-guided missiles aimed by Allah at the shaitans, or the evil ones, the evil jinn or forces. And again, Muhammad did not understand astronomy. He did not know what a lunar eclipse was or a solar eclipse. That's why when he saw one, he thought Armageddon was going to break out. That's why you have repeated references, and I think I talked about this in the last video, the idea that the earth is flat, that it's a covering. Muslims will try to say that this is metaphoric language when you hear the word canopy or the earth as a covering, but he's being literal. Muhammad is describing, he's not being metaphorical in those verses. There are metaphors and similes in the Quran, but that's not one of them. Muhammad was ignorant, and he actually believed the earth was flat, just like he believed that comets were missiles. And for those who disbelieve in their Lord is the punishment of hell, and evil is the resort. And that's one of the main subjects of this verse, this surah rather. When they shall be cast therein, they shall hear a loud moaning of it as it heaves, almost bursting for fury. Whether a group is cast into it, its keeper shall ask them, did there not come to you a warner? And this is, of course, is referring to Muhammad. They shall say, yea, indeed there came to us a warner, but we rejected him and said, Allah has not revealed anything. You only are in great error. And they shall say, had we but listened or pondered, we should not have been among the inmates of the burning fire. So they shall acknowledge their sins, but far will be forgiveness from the inmates of the burning fire. And it's interesting here, Muhammad, whenever he describes judgment, he has the people not only it's not them confessing that Allah is God, but they're actually depending upon how you read it, it seems like they're repenting, and yet they're still thrown into hell, which is odd, but that's Islam for you. But yeah, like when he's describing judgment, these people are suddenly try to become Muslims, or in a sense acknowledge that that Islam is the true religion. But not only that, but the idea of them them acknowledging their sins is interesting, especially when you consider the fact that in Islam, you don't really have original sin. You don't have the that's something that's categorically rejected, this idea of the fall. So they believe that every person was born innately good and they simply stray. So that's why when someone becomes converts to Islam, they say they call them a revert. In other words, they're returning to their original nature. And it's it's kind of problematic when you actually think about this, because if there is no sin, if there's no imputed sin, if the fall didn't happen, then what's the point of actually uh, becoming or returning to Islam? It doesn't make that much sense with in this context, in the Islamic context. Like, what are they what are they atoning for, or what do they need atonement for if there's no original sin? In 12, it says, "As for those who fear their Lord in secret, they shall surely have forgiveness and a great reward." And this is interesting when you actually contrast this with the Gospels. And let me just turn to the Gospel of Luke, and let's see if I can find this. So, in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, it says in verse 26, "For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and of my words, of him shall the Son of Man be ashamed when he shall come in his own glory and in his Father's and the holy angels." So, um, so that's verse 9:26, and it's interesting when you contrast it with Islam. Uh, this verse, when it describes fearing their Lord in secret, and he's referring to Allah in this case, but it's it's very it's very telling, because when people discuss taqiyya, they usually associate it with Shiites because they had to conceal their religion. They're about 19% of the Muslim population globally. And with the exception of certain countries like Iraq or Iran, and even in Iraq, they were had to conceal some of their identity because they were under the control of a Sunni dictator. But in history, the Shiites have had to use taqiyya in order to protect themselves. So it's kind of associated. It's kind of considered a Shiite practice, but the truth is, it's an Islamic practice. What the Shiites do, or what they have done, they're simply adopting this from the Quran. Even though it's associated with Shiism, it really is a Muslim practice. And the same thing goes for nikah muta, or pleasure marriages. This is something that the Shiites adopted from Muhammad and the example of him and his companions. Even though Sunnis reject it now and look at it scornfully, it really is an outgrowth of the formation of Islam. So when it says here, "Fear their Lord in secret," this is basically taqiyya, and I just want to show you the contrast between that and the gospel. And in verse 13, it says, "And conceal your word or manifest it. Surely he is cognizant of what is in the heart." So again, it doesn't matter if you openly proclaim your belief in Allah or you deny him, in order to save your skin. In 14, it says, "Does he not know who created? And he is the knower of the subtleties, aware, the aware, capital A. He it is who made the earth smooth for you." Okay, so here it is. I made a mistake earlier when I said I talked about this in recent videos, but here it is. In verse 15, it says, "He it is who made the earth smooth for you, and therefore go about in the spacious sides thereof, and eat of his sustenance, and to him is the return after death." Now, here it is, when Muslims deny that Muhammad believed in a flat earth, you can point them to this, because you can go to Surah 2, verse 22. Let's just let's just let's just go there now. really quickly. So in Surah 2 and in verse 22, it says, "Who made the earth a resting place for you, and the heaven a canopy, and who sends down rain from the cloud, then brings forth with it subsistence for you of the fruits. Therefore, do not set up rivals to Allah while you know." Again, a reference to shirk, which is contradicted by this surah among others. And in verse, so it's a little bit vague, even though they use the word canopy. It's somewhat vague there. But let's go to another verse in the Quran, verse 15, 19. Let's see if we can make this a little more clear. So in verse 19 of Surah 15, it says, "And the earth we have spread it forth and made in it firm mountains and caused to grow in it of every suitable thing." And remember, Muhammad says that mountains were planted there in order to make the earth stable, and this is contradicted by science. But there, it's pretty clear he's referring to a flat surface, a flat earth. So here it says, "He it is who made the earth smooth for you. Therefore, go about in the spacious sides thereof and eat of his sustenance, and to him is the return after death." Now, there are other surahs and other verses that make the same point, but here it's pretty clear when you look at the context. He's talking about a flat earth. Um, Even though he's not trying to describe parts of Saudi Arabia or the Hejaz that are less mountainous than others. He's simply describing what he believes the earth to be, i.e., flat. Uh, okay, 16, it says, "Are you secure of those in the heaven that he should not make the earth to swallow you up? Then lo, it shall be in the state of commotion. Or are they secure of those in the heaven that he should not send down upon you a punishment? Then shall you know how was my warning." And certainly there before them, and certainly those before them rejected the truth. Then how was my disapproval? Uh, have you not seen the birds above them expanding their wings and contracting them? What is it that withholds them save the beneficent God? Surely he sees everything. And this is a repeated trope throughout the Quran, referring to parts of nature, animals, the earth, the sky, things like that, created things or aspects of the planet or the universe, the galaxy, and then saying, "Well, this is proof that Allah is is God." But he doesn't provide any evidence. He's simply referring to that. Now, in the Bible, you have and you see this a lot in the Psalms, references to the majesty of God, and you have certain analogies to the waves or the ocean. But again, the Quran uses these things as kind of a kind of this self-evident truth, but he doesn't really provide any evidence. Most of the miracles he describes are miracles that are taken directly from the Old Testament, and in many cases, um, kind 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 of kind of vitiated and altered and reprocessed through his prism of this Arab centric religion that he's initiating. So in 20 it says, "Or who is it that will be a host for you to assist you besides the beneficent God? The unbelievers are only in deception." And again, keep in mind this surah in Islamic tradition, they say that these ayah, every one of them is going to be used to intercede on your behalf if you're a Muslim on the Day of Judgment. So it's it's another one of these surahs that's kind of self-refuting when you actually read it. And it ends, "The unbelievers are only in deception," and continues, "Or who is it that will give you sustenance if he should withhold his sustenance? Nay, they persist in disdain and derision. What is he who goes prone upon his face better guided, or he who walks upright upon a straight path?" And this is also kind of ironic because of um, because of the belief among Muslims that you have to pray on your face. But I'll just skip over that. In 23, it says, "Say, He it is who brought you into being and made for you the ears and the eyes and the hearts. Little is it that you give thanks." And I'll just note that Muslim embryology is really deficient, just like the astronomy of Muhammad. He didn't understand embryology and how babies developed in the womb. He thought he didn't understand that flesh and muscle and bone developed simultaneously in a certain way that it did not like clothe, um, that flesh wasn't clothing bone. Um, so, but there are other things like the whole idea of man being developed from a blood clot is something else that's unusual about Muhammad's beliefs. So in 24 it says, "Say, He it is who multiplied you in the earth, and to Him you shall be gathered." And they say, "When shall the threat be executed if you are truthful?" So this is primarily the Quraysh. This surah is directed at the Quraysh who were skeptical about Muhammad's claims, and they were always challenging him. They were asking him to tell them the day of judgment. In 26, it says, this is his response: "Say, the knowledge thereof is only with Allah, and I am only a plain warner." That's Muhammad's excuse whenever he's challenged. "But when they shall see it nigh, the faces of those who disbelieve shall be sorry, and it shall be said, that is that which you used to call for. Say, have you considered if Allah should destroy me and those with me? Rather, He will have mercy on us. Yet who will protect the unbelievers from a painful punishment?" And just to set the record straight, Muhammad died an agonizing death over a period of years because he ate poisoned meat given to him by a woman whose husband he killed. So he did not have Allah was not merciful to Muhammad in any way, at least for the last 3 years of his life. In 29, it says, "Say, He is the beneficent God. We believe in Him, and on Him do we rely. So you shall come to know who it is that is in clear error." And I'm sure Muhammad learned that. Uh, so in 30, it says, "Say, have you considered if your water would go down, who it is then that will bring you flowing water?" And this is interesting because this is the last verse of the surah, and it echoes a little bit the promise of Jesus to the Samaritan woman, the woman at the well, to provide living water, water that doesn't need to be replenished. But in the Islamic context, the water is simply like dates or fruit trees or any of these other things you see in paradise. And paradise is simply a reflection of Muhammad's own desires, and it's basically an extension of what he thinks you should do on earth. Um, anyway, so that is Surah 67. Surah 68 is entitled "The Pen," and that will be an interesting surah to go over because it's basically Muhammad defending himself against accusations that he's insane. So it's kind of like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer is declared insane and he has to convince people because he wears a pink shirt. And that's basically what this reminded me of, because you have a person who's been accused of being insane, and it's not like people are gaslighting him. They're just observing his behavior and listening to him. But he uses that sort to deny the fact that he's insane, and that will be interesting. So we'll go over that in the next video, and I'll see you. See you soon.